They want to know where everybody is. They want to tag you. They want to know where all the food's coming from, including what you're producing yourself, all at the same time while what you consider agribusiness is declining in crop yields. Without coming clean to the populace, truly what's happening and what's next for grain production. Deliver the message the most succinctly and clearly to people so they can take action. And good afternoon, everyone. As always, you're looking for brilliant minds to try to let us see into the future so we can take action and get ready for these changes that we all see. Now, the planet is completely seeing it every way, shape, and form. There's really nowhere on the planet that's not seeing or being affected by these changes at the moment here. So today with me, I got J.R. Nyquist, writer and also geopolitical global events to try to tie in an enormous amount of pinpoints and data across a wide array of disciplines. It comes up with a much wider picture or tapestry of global events, also a researcher. So if you want to check out more, jrnyquist.blog, and he just put up a couple new articles there. You know, we've had a couple interviews before. Now, it's been about, a year and a half since time's elapsed since our last one. So the general trend, we nailed that, where it's going. But specifics, it's hard to predict a few of those, but there are some more that are coming out very cleanly now. This will be next, and this will be the next. And we're going to talk about some of those things today. But it's all about pointing out the problem and then getting prepared for it. It's not just purely here's the problem, but we want to present some solutions also as we move through. And to frame it, the reason we were going to talk today is just for those, maybe it's not on your radar, but China has lost an enormous amount of crops. They lost most of their first season, or what they call early season rice crop. And there's a huge amount of flooding in a different area than it was last year, up the central belt through all the way from, say, southern part of China up into Shanghai. That huge grain growing belt is just devastated with floods, like 1,000-year flood after 1,000-year flood. Here in the United States, we experience the same thing, massive flooding that you're not hearing about so much on the news because they want to stabilize grain prices. Now, China out there that would buy across the planet is looking to South America, but as you know, the record floods that wiped away an enormous amount of stored grains in Brazil. Now we got Argentina. The sea is freezing and the waves are freezing in Argentina. This is how cold it's getting. So something is out of kilter. And then if we want to add in the rest of the grains, Ukraine's nearly offline. They're not going to produce much this year. And as the Russian offensive continues to advance, they're going to produce less and less, down to pretty much zero. So where does that leave our world then? Because a world doesn't function without food. And then you can see, well, Jeffrey's the expert on that, where military conquest comes in when food runs out. So take what you can from the video and our talk today, share it with your friends and family, and use this as a strategy to implement your solutions as we move forward. So Jeffrey, with that, I'll leave it up to you because your mind is going to bend this crowd here. There you go, man.
There's this problem of food. This question of food may be the interesting explanation. I thought I would mention this book, which came out some years ago now. It was really ahead of its time. David Archibald, he's an Australian, The Twilight of Abundance. He saw that not only is the population going to go over 8 billion people, but we're going to lose the capacity to even feed half that number. And of course, 48% of the calories of the people of the world come from grains. And a lot of those grains are grown at these higher latitudes in North America and Europe.
Howdy, partner. You know people are having dinner and the smart ones are eating beef. Let me tell you a brief history, or more accurately, a beef history of dinner. Domestication of cattle happened around 8,000 BC, but that's not when beef became what's for dinner. We've been eating beef since times before history. The earliest cave paintings have beef eloquently depicted on the walls. Those cave drawings of the hunt were for the aurochs, a primitive bovine. That's right. Beef. Like I said, people are having dinner now. And the smart ones, well, they're eating beef. Americans want great food today. But we also want to have great food to eat if things go south in a hurry. Unlike most companies that take the cheapest, worst parts of the cow, then turn them into beef crumbles, whatever that is. They freeze-dry them in hopes that their customers will never actually try to eat it. Our premium beef cubes are sous vide, freeze-dried, and ready to be eaten right now, or in a decade from now. We want you to eat our beef now, so you can buy more. Prep with steaks, not with beef crumbles. This is a high-quality product. It's all American beef and 100% natural. None of that craziness of lab-grown meat and mRNA jabs. Our beef has a shelf life of 10 plus years. This is high-quality cooked and freeze-dried beef for long-term storage or not. Eat well today and eat well tomorrow. Click the link in the description to get your Prepper beef with Prepper All Naturals, so you will always know what's for dinner.
President Trump warned the U.S. dollar is crashing and will no longer be the world standard. BRICS, attracting more and more countries and moving away from the U.S. dollar. A global de-dollarization trend accelerates. Gold is security in times of uncertainty. Call the Patriot Gold Group today before it's too late. And Patriot Gold Group has an OP for Life IRA, where your IRA or 401k could be in physical gold or silver. No fee for Life IRA on qualifying rollovers. Give them a call, 888-546-7020. And now on with the video.
And if those areas are no longer going to be able to produce the grain, this shortfall for 8 billion people, it is just, you know that this shortfall occurred just because of the war in Ukraine, but that's just a drop in the bucket compared to any major weather changes where there's cooling in the upper latitudes and they can't plant. They get a foreshortened growing season. They're not able to harvest. And yet we've had this weather in the southern hemisphere especially, and in China with repeated flooding year after year. You were telling me about the China was going to buy all this grain from Brazil, and they had sudden floods in Brazil, and it wiped the grain out while it was being stored on riverbanks, waiting for ships to pick it up. Can you tell us any more about that?
Yeah, if you look down, and this is in the southern part of Brazil, not all of Brazil, southern Brazil. And again, you pinpoint at which kind of crop growing areas they were on the corn or the wheat down there, the soybeans. And if you looked, it was just standing fields from helicopters as far as you could see. Now, that was at the tapering end of the harvest season. So there was harvests that were taken out of the fields before the floods. But as always, they're stored predominantly along riverbanks in the silos on the farms getting ready, and then they take them into larger facilities that are going to then put those on ships outbound for export. And then those 1,000-year floods rolled down river. And did it ever destroy an enormous amount of facilities? And then you got to think about, well, if this facility wasn't actually physically washed away, then the water, when it comes into contact with the grain, they call it wicking, where the water will start to soak up, and it'll get to a certain level. And that whole bottom layer of the grain is unusable. It becomes moldy. But then the question is, what do they do with the top layer that's still dry, not not moldy, but once you know that those two layers have come in contact, then there could be some contamination in there. Now, most times it's relegated to animal feed, and it can qualify and move over into that, which was human consumption that was bound for export, and then move over into the animal feed realms. But you got to think about, along a system of riverways and port facilities that were inundated with, like I say, 1,000-year floods. All the columns were wicking in every storage facility. They're not watertight. There are some that are, but generally they're just a storage facility waiting for that to be loaded. So what happens now? The thing is, They're not coming clean on exactly how much of the crop is not going to be bound for export because of the wicking effect of grains that are now becoming moldy. And then you think about it, what resources would it take to get in there of every grain storage area, facility, warehouse, silo, whatever it is, and then scrape off that top layer of grain? And then where do you determine that boundary layer? Well, this is good enough. And then 1 foot down, it's not good enough. This is a human error type of thing because it's going to be done by humans. If there's too much moisture in that and they make the wrong call because they want to scrape an extra 2 foot off or an extra foot, then that wet layering gets put into the transport vessel. And then by the time it arrives, then that moisture is then, created all this contamination, and there could be mold, funguses, these sort of things in the entire ship by the time it arrives because of that bad grain that was put in. So they're going to lose an enormous amount off the wicking effect. And then at the top, it's going to be suspect if the human observer can actually see where that layer is, because sometimes you can't see these molds and things that are on and inside. Again, you're going to need microscopes and that sort of thing to get down in to see what's on the grain husk or on the surface of whatever.
Because what you want with grain is you want it to be dry, right?
It has to be totally dry. You can't ship it partially moist, and there's like a moist area in it, because that's going to create the conditions for it to then start actually growing mold, which you can see. Like normally the mold is the last thing you see. The contamination started long, long, long before you see that mold popping out. That's kind of like mushrooms with mycelium. You got to grow that, root layer and base layer in there before the actual mushrooms come out. That entire substrate is completely full of mushroom before it ever pops out the first one that you can harvest and eat. It's the same thing with molds. So again, really, is China going to buy it? How much can they buy? And they're out on the market looking for an enormous amount of grain, which they cannot secure right now. So now it's becoming this bidding war. And for me, it's really suspect that the USDA would downgrade the price forecasts, but upgrade to record production in America after we just had some massive record floods ourselves, which wiped out an enormous amount of grain growing areas in the north from Illinois down. Nebraska was spared this time, but not last time. But so we started to get into Missouri and Illinois, and you come down, and these are massive, again, from a helicopter view, as far as you can see, massive fields, sending what is now record floods at this time of the year down the Mississippi. And the USDA still says we're going to come to record production in America. And then they downgraded the forecast, obviously, for pricing, because of record production. Oversupply equals less demand, or something with the pricing is going to decrease on that. So start to add all these variables up, and I'm not getting a full picture here. I know somebody's lying at that point, but one thing for true is China's out voraciously buying because they just lost a huge amount of crops too. So the southern hemisphere getting really cold, and you can talk more to that, but not having grains coming out of Ukraine is devastating for what would have been African nations. So where's everybody going to start to shift these chess pieces to secure their grain supplies? Is really more the question.
Yeah, and of course that has always intrigued me, is that the timing of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and Ukraine is a major breadbasket. Were they invading Ukraine at this time because it was important to rapidly secure that area of grain production? Because we know, of course, that China and Russia are aligned, and Russia can then supply China with the grain. I mean, Russia's a huge supplier, and they're going to step up to supply China, so that you can see that these different alliances, like the China-Russia alliance and their partners, they want to secure the grain and oil they need to survive, and the West needs to secure the grain and oil it needs to survive. So there's this competition that's coming about. And I wonder, in terms of the story was always that that China had projected a future, it would be ready for a future war with America in 2035, and suddenly they're getting aggressive, and the Russians are getting aggressive in 2020, 2021, 22. Ukraine gets invaded. That they needed to go to war sooner rather than later. That they were going to go to war with us in 2035, but now they need to bring the war closer, because they've got problems in their economy. And food wasn't mentioned, but I think food is integral to this problem. We know the Chinese financial economy is coming apart. The Chinese banks don't have any money left in them. For example, you got to draw more than $2,700 in the equivalent U.S. cash out of a Chinese bank account. You have to have the local sheriff, the local law enforcement, local police sign off together with the bank. And sometimes you need, for a larger amount, two other institutions to sign off that you can use this money. So they're not allowing people, they're trying to keep people from taking funds out of their bank accounts. Now, people can come and take little amounts every day and start to drain their accounts. And this is what's keeping interest rates in China from collapsing even more, just by sitting where they are. If they do anything, it's a catastrophe. If they stay where they are, they're losing, I've heard from 5 to 7% of their money is draining away every year. And they're not making any profits. Also, China's passing massive legislation and making preparations to seize all Western assets, European, American assets in China. And of course, this has been clearly prepared carefully over a period of years. And so it looks like, and of course, these are all things you do before a war, but also maybe out of desperation. So Valentina Zarkova, I've had email exchanges with her. Of course, what Mr. Archibald says in this book, Twilight of Abundance, is that you're going to lose half or more of the world's grain production. And of course, what do the elites and the scientists and the people know in the Western countries, in China, in Russia, and how much of what we are seeing in the strategy of these countries is related to this issue? And I think it's been, now that we see the cooling in the Southern Hemisphere, I had an Australian reader talk about the lower temperatures in Australia, snow in Tasmania. We know how it's affected crops in Argentina, and you just mentioned Brazil. These, Brazil's grain growing areas are really in the Southern Hemisphere, in southern Brazil. And of course, this is really doing a number on folks, catching people short. And the question is, what will happen then in the future? What preparations are being made? I've heard things, for example, that FEMA in the United States is stockpiling grain on its own. And I think there's probably things going on at the different government levels that we're not hearing about. I mean, have you heard anything?
Pro Clear Cleanse is the most powerful spray cleaner on the market today. No elbow grease necessary. Pro Clear Cleanse cuts through grease and grime like a chef's knife. Finally, the one cleaner that can do it all. Powerful surfactant cleaning technology cleans ovens, glass, porcelain, even polished wood. Environmentally friendly, less packaging and waste with no harsh smells, pet safe, child safe. 5 tablets equals 1 bottle of traditional cleaner. It's 5 months of cleaning for a fraction of the cost. Behold the grease-erasing power of Odor Crush. Simply drop a tablet into your bottle of warm water and shake it so it is evenly diluted. Spray the surface you want cleaned. Let set longer for tougher grease. Take a paper towel or a reusable cloth and wipe. Done and done.
Well, the continuity of government continues, and each individual agency is responsible for its own continuity plan of an overall umbrella plan. Our government survives. Our government dominates the planet after this thing's over. Whatever it takes to get prepared for that continuity of government planning. So you got to think also, what is it that globally there's this push for everybody to register their chickens on their farm? Why do we need to suddenly start talk of registering your home garden? Why do we need now to register all livestock? And now with the BFF, your best friend forever, coming around, now even crossing state lines with chickens or sheep or hogs, cattle, whatever it is, there's an enormous amount of new laws put on 2024 about transporting animals across state line. It's like they're trying to firewall off. And then, here I was talking with Jim Gale earlier, and he got $1,000 fine for each chicken that was brought from South Carolina into Florida because they didn't register it. But then over in the UK, it's a 5,000 pound fine for having chickens that are unregistered in your backyard. And I believe it was Scotland.
5,000 pounds fine for having an unregistered chicken.
Yep.
So we can't just take care of ourselves anymore with chickens and gardens. And this is not just one country. This is in the UK and this is in the US. And you do some farming. What were the regulations on your chickens a couple of years ago? They didn't have this?
No, they didn't. And again, it all coincides. You see how this is dovetailing here with the new out. So that would be able to regulate any kind of cross-border commerce, including states or even counties. Imagine if it comes down to the county firewalls itself off, and then, oh, you transported a chicken across the county line. So, it's kind of absurd that A, we're losing all these crops right now for whatever reason you want to give, wartime or economics or something. Then we got the natural on top of that that's not being given credit for destroying the crops. It's always got to be geopolitical or economy. But then at the same time, overlaying this, they really want to control and absolutely know where every single calorie, every ounce of protein, every egg is coming from across the personal backyard garden homesteading space too. So you're getting all these layers on top. And for me, it's like, wait a minute. They want to know where everybody is. They want to tag you. They want to know where all the food's coming from, including what you're producing yourself, all at the same time while what you consider agribusiness is declining in crop yields, without coming clean to the populace, truly what's happening and what's next for grain production. That's where Valentina Zarkova and an enormous amount of other people have said, whoa, wait a minute. This is where once it drops off, we don't really pull out of that for a prolonged period of time, and that will affect global food production. And when it does, you're going to start to see flips of governments. You're going to see a lot of civil unrest. So I think a lot of what we see, government bodies, et cetera, are trying to front run that and lead that. The stock market crashes, and a lot of people try to pin those together with effects of higher solar activity means higher stock market, lower solar activity means lower stock market. It's just a general way to look at it. A lot of people try to put solar activity, electromagnetism, and some sort of zodiacal energies into how the stock market performs. And a lot of people, there's entire realms of study on solar maximum and solar minimum and how the stock market's affected by those energetic flows from the sun in itself.
Well, if this is
hit
right, this is only going to be a 7-year cycle. If just looking at this chart, if this follows a regular normal curve, we're already, that's 3.5 years into it with another 3.5 years to go. Before 2028, we're going to be done with this.
Yeah, be generous and say even 9 years, but that's where Zarkova pinned that global food shortage was 2028. I remember, listening to her and watching interviews, and I'd reached out with her email a few times too. And she was saying 2028 was the time, and government, this is 2018, by the way, 10 years prior. She's like, 2018, governments need to start preparing for what's coming in 2028, because by that point, we're going to have global famines. And if you all don't prepare and stockpile and get ready to feed the citizens, we're going to have a global famine because of all of the
this
changes.
is where there's this weird, freaky coincidence between what people watching Chinese military preparations and this come together. China's military preparations appear to be opening a window for them to break out and to be aggressive starting next fall all the way up to 2028. And I've heard this from expert after expert people I've talked to. They're saying, look, China has this window to go. China's preparing to go. China's telling its people that they're going to go to war. And of course, it's like they want to go to war by 2028 for military reasons, but they have intentionally brought their military production and readiness up to a level where we can't catch up to them till 2028. At which time they have this window to do something. And of course, 2029 is when the United States starts producing nuclear warheads again. And of course, we have a nuclear arsenal that's rotted out. And the Minuteman missiles are we've almost lost half of the missiles that we've tested in the last several years on the Minuteman tests. And the Minuteman III, they were deploying those missiles when I was a little boy, more than a half century ago. So this is a very frightening situation because you have this 8 billion people, 1.4 billion of them are Chinese. They're having trouble with their food supply. They know more trouble is coming. And you're looking at, basically this year and its harvest is going to be as good as it gets despite the flooding, because this thing is going down now. From now on, it's going to get worse. And if in 2028, you're at the beginning of solar cycle 26, and Zarkov and these people are saying that really these are really good. They're going to be a nothing in terms of the solar radiation diminished, the sun's electromagnetic field being depressed. That's going to allow a flood of cosmic rays to hit the oceans, to create clouds. You're going to have massive floods.
Yeah, that's on the surface. And then, you need to speak to the changing magnetic field on our planet. But as you referenced, Ben Davidson, he's the expert on that, on how quickly the Earth's magnetic field is declining.
And
So,
what is Davidson saying? I know I've seen that, and it's kind of alarming that, ever since, now you can correct me if I'm wrong, but ever since the Carrington event in 1859, where the sun put out this flare that hit the earth and just fried telegraphs around the world. It fried the only electromagnetic infrastructure we had back then, which was the telegraph system. Ever since then, the Earth's electromagnetic field has been weakening, ever since that event. And that was an event that came off the sun. It was a solar flare. And now it's accelerating, right?
yeah, and Ben has some really good data on that. And, the acceleration had jumped up from, 1% per decade, and now it's running over 5% per decade. And if you speed that up a little bit, that'll be like 1% per year. And again, it doesn't have to go all the way to zero before something happens, and my looking and research on it was all the sacred numerology built into what is the world as we know it. If you go to the number 36, which is par excellence for everything, including Tesla's 369 workings of the universe, maybe that's the trigger number that everybody across in unison had understood, that the magnetic field doesn't have to go to zero. If it gets around 36% or so in that wavering area, that's the trigger point. And that's why all these numbers are built in, so you never forget those numbers. It's across all religions, across all times. They've put these numbers and plugged them in for a reason, so we never forget those numbers.
That something is recurring. And you go to Plato's texts, where Solon, his ancestor, goes to Egypt, goes to Sais, which was then the capital of Egypt, meets with these priests, and this particular elderly priest who knew a lot of the written records that Egypt still had. They had a lot of rotting papyrus with things going back thousands of years, and he talked about this recurring event where the sun scorches the earth. And some kind of solar event that is catastrophic on the earth. And it's very hard to understand. It sounds like super electromagnetic storms hitting the earth. And we have not ever seen the Earth's electromagnetic, in at least our written history, the Earth's electromagnetic field collapse. And then what happens, like with the sun, every 11 years, it collapses, reverses, recharges. But on the earth, it's like it happens every 7 to 10,000 years, 11,000 years. What's the cycle on that? Do we know?
Well, again, maybe it happens more frequently, and then history is written by the victors, because there's a lot of obfuscating of history, and it gets really murky after 2,000 years before present, going back at the birth of Christ era, that Anno Domini era beginning. Anything before that was pretty much destroyed at the change of an age anyway, because that seems to be, people always ask, well, why are so many noses broke off all the Sphinx and all these things across in Egypt and the pharaohs and the statues of that time? Well, they changed an age also. And it seems like when we change an age, that everything of the prior age is destroyed, and then it works through new. So if you go to a lot of museums across in Europe, you're going to see almost every single Greek and Roman statue with some deformation on it of humans at that time also destroyed that age. And then, it's interesting, we come into this time now where it's called a great reset, or is it really the destruction of the old, because we don't have a bunch of statues sitting around? But if you can restructure society to forget the old, because the vibratory pattern won't match anymore of either the rulership or the overseership of humans and how they're farmed on the planet. Some people may agree or disagree with that. But approximately 12,000 years is that repeating cycle. Now, does the Earth turn over completely like a Hapgood, Earth's crustal displacement type of thing? That's conjecture in itself. Is there a micronova that comes out Well, Douglas Vogt seemed to have an enormous amount of information on that and when the next one was occurring and where the safe point, but he passed away mysteriously after releasing the video saying that the doors that they were using for these underground bunkers were in the wrong locations and that they needed to change them. And he was going to start listing specifically where these areas were. And he passed away right after that video was released. So there seems to be something on that.
Was he predicting a micronova event? Was that what he was doing?
Yeah, yes, he was, along with Ben Davidson. So they're all on, Earth's magnetic field's flipping, and it was around 2047 was this next micronova event that was
and tell me the science on this, that the Earth's electromagnetic field is directly related to the sun's. Is that not correct?
Oh, absolutely. The connections are 1,000%.
And you've got the electric universe model, and I've heard about this, where stars themselves are linked by invisible electromagnetic ties between even the stars. I read a little bit about this micronova event to explain it to the people listening. Micronova event is, we know what a nova is when a sun explodes, right? And it sends debris it all over all over the surrounding areas of space. But a micronova is when a sun sort of has a cough, and it coughs up a bunch of junk that's got into the sun, and it throws it out. And of course, it's like a solar flare only times 1,000,000, And of course, that means that pieces of hot plasma are going to hit planets. They're gonna hit the planets. And they found evidence, if I'm not mistaken, when we went to the moon, one of the things they wanted to check was evidence in the moon rocks that the moon, because the moon has no weather, it can't, if there's scarring on the moon of these past micronovas, there would be evidence of the rock having been superheated. And my understanding is they found that evidence. Is that your understanding?
It was glass spherules that you're looking for. And
Right.
that seems to be part of that. Now you have to ask yourself why. All the governments of the world in unison have shifted like a school of fish. That's never in recorded history ever happened. Well, perhaps it has, but we're just not getting the full history. But in our modern era, up to 2020, there has never been a unison of all countries all at the same time implementing policy to change the world so radically that rulers would normally be thrown out of power. All at the same time, including North Korea, by the way. So you can't tell me that there's something that's just randomly happening. We're like, this is a good idea. We should all do. There's knowledge that's being given out there. And the reason you say, why is China behaving a little differently and stepped up their plans? Well, perhaps they have new information about the intensity of the cycle and the onset of it, and the precursors to it are going to be much more violent than were previously thought. So the lead up, if you're looking at the actuation of the cycle and then the intensity build up, they probably figure out, it's going to be a way more intense cycle. The intensity build up and the events into that are going to be seen by all.
It's unknown if early man knew they would be the progenitors of great civilizations, or if they knew when their empires would fall and disappear into history. Fortunately for us as modern man, we can recognize that we are at the precipice, a point in history where we can see the cycle changing. Where we go from here is up to us.